As we go through life, looking at our legacy plan, our estate planning documents, most of us have planned for two different issues. One, why we're here right now, perfectly competent and able to make decisions for ourselves. And two, when we're dead, we've passed away, and how our heirs and our spouses receive what's left over. I will argue there is a third period of time, and that is when we're no longer able to make the best decisions for ourselves, but we're still here. People will call it cognitively impaired, dementia. There's many different terms for it. But what I want to do is make sure that you and I are prepared for that situation before it arrives. Join us on Consider This program today. We'll give you some things to talk about. Well, good morning and welcome to Consider This program. I am your host, Joe Clark.
And I'm Daren Hardesty.
Daren is one of our senior advisors at the Financial Enhancement Group. Very, very happy to have him along. He's going to run most of the show. I just want to give you an overall broad view perspective, if you will, where we are, where I'm trying to take this segment and where Daren is going to take you. When I had my first trust done, it was 2002, so 20 years ago. It was 22 pages long, and all of the pages, with the exception of 1.5, dealt with what happens to me when I died. How Kaylee and Kendra, both young at the time, were able to receive the money if something happened to Barb and I, how Barb would get it if something happened to me. But it all dealt with death. And I think most people in the estate planning world think about what happens when I'm gone. This is my 33rd, 34th year in the industry coming up. Financial Enhancement Group is 25 this year. Here in 2022. And, I've done this for a long time. And I will tell you, you go through not 2 phases of a legacy plan, but you really go through 3 for most of us. There's obviously today where we are quite with it, quite competent, able to make decisions. We know what day of the week it is. We know to take showers. We know to feed ourselves. And, we know to take medicine, right? And then there's going to be a period of time when God calls us home and, hey, that's going to happen. And you've got a plan laid out for how you want your heirs to get the money. And hopefully your documents match what your plans are. That's one of the things that Daren and the team does at the Financial Enhancement Group for people is we bring people in, read your legal documents to make sure, not that they're legally accurate, but that they match your wishes, because a lot of times things change, and people will have documents that are simply either outdated or, and as a matter of fact, say things that you didn't think were actually in there. You'd be amazed the number of people who get a trust put together or a will put together and never actually read it. That's our job. We have an attorney on staff to help with that. But that's part of what we do for people at the Financial Enhancement Group. But my argument is this, and then I'm going to turn this over to Daren, is that there's that space between the two. It's when you are fully with it and still alive. And then there's a period of time when you're still alive, but you're not fully with it. I call it a sandwich short of a picnic. I try to bring humor into the situation, but it really, really is sad. And when I look at the last 34 years of my career in the financial services industry, it has not been the nanny or the kids or, the crooked salesmen that have harmed people near as much as it is their own lack of cognitive ability. The unawareness that you don't know what you don't know, and you make decisions today that you wouldn't have made in the past. And how do you have somebody step in and to help you work in that area? Your trust, like mine, says, if my kids think I'm incompetent, they have to take me in front of a judge or in front of a doctor. And our chief medical officer, or our chief operating officer, if you will, was the chief medical officer at St. John's. He's an MD, and he said in all of his years, he never signed one of those forms for somebody that wasn't in the hospital. Why would he want to wind up in court for 2 weeks? Right? And, so the doctors don't want to sign off on that to say that somebody's incompetent. There's too much risk and nothing to gain. And I've yet to see in 34 years anybody take their dad in front of a judge to say, yeah, he indeed is incompetent. It just doesn't happen. Yeah, if you're in a car wreck and you're incapacitated, doctors will sign that. But folks, as we go through this process of mental decay, which is just part of life, we need a solution. And that's what I have spent, and it's what I will spend the rest of my career trying to figure out how to work on. So we have some ideas, we have some thoughts, constantly a work in progress. But happy to talk to you about it if you get signed up for a Next Steps meeting. You can do that at yourlifeafterwork.com. All right, Daren, talk to me.
All right, thank you, Joe. And if you can't tell by the shows that we've done, this is a really important topic that our team is taking very seriously and making sure that we're planning accordingly. And Joe, I just want to talk about why it's so much more important. I have two parts. I really want to kind of give it an example scenario here in a few minutes. But to start out, I want to talk about why it's important and something that, when you really consider where we're at in the economy with different age groups and as they're moving through towards retirement, it starts to make a whole lot more sense why this is more important now than ever. Between 1957, if you were born in 1957 to 1961, all right, there's roughly 20% of our population is in that category. Those individuals are one of the first full, where they could spend their entire career from the mid to early 80s, maybe a little before, all the way through to now, where they've been saving inside of a 401k or 403b instead of working to earn a pension. And so now, instead of having people retire and Social Security and a pension be the number one income generator, the mailbox checks that come in, now people are dying with assets, or they're living longer with assets. And our health care is getting better, so people are living longer. We have a larger amount of our population that's going to be moving into their 80s and 90s with assets. And so things have to be done in a way to prepare beneficiaries and make sure that things are in order differently than what it used to be. It's just everything is lining up to make this an issue. And as people live longer, that in-between period that you talk about, we have you're in control, then you're in between for a certain amount of time, and then you pass. And only few of us will pass away instantly. It's
about 10% that simply just drop dead.
They don't have to go
Strokes,
through that in
heart
between.
attacks, those kind of things.
Exactly. So if we're aging and people are living longer and we're seeing more cognitive decline amongst more people with assets, now all of a sudden all those assets and how they're handled and how they're managed, to keep things the way that you want them to be, or each individual wants them to be, it becomes a much bigger topic of discussion than it used to be, even 20 years ago.
You said this. I just want to lay this out for folks again so you can think about this, right? So, when you used to have a $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month pension, right? And you lost track of what you were doing and you went to the casino, right? Or you got scammed over the phone, right? You could have lost a month's worth of income, right? But those pension managers are very similar to my team at the Financial Enhancement Group, right? I mean, they're CFAs, they're CMTs, they're CFPs, they're people that are trained in the world of finance, right? And we know, when we're mentally incapacitated, we're removed, right? You're not. You're still in charge as your own fiduciary. You're still in charge of that $1 million or $2 million 401k or IRA, right? And, all of a sudden you're making decisions that you don't know that you shouldn't be making. And somebody can scam you not for a month's worth of income, right? But they can scam you for $50, $100, $250,000. And honestly, the things that I have seen, they don't qualify necessarily as scams where somebody shouldn't have done it. I just know in Daren's right mind, Daren wouldn't have put $250,000 into a horse feed operation, even though there was a prospectus and the business operation looked good. But all of a sudden you've got a mom or a dad that has invested $250,000 because it sounded like a good idea. They knew the people, right? And, I would say it was a breach of fiduciary duty, but they're not fiduciaries. They're salespeople.
Yep.
Right? You are your own fiduciary at 59, 69, or 89, unless you hire somebody who, by definition, has to treat your money as if it were their money, and they were in a similar situation. And with whatever financial infrastructure you have, you need to ask that question specifically. Are you a legal fiduciary, or are you selling stuff? And you're going to hear this, well, I have to act in your best interest, or I've been in the industry for a long time, or come on now, I would never tell you anything that's bad. Those all may be very accurate, but that doesn't mean they're a fiduciary, and you need that protection.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things we're going to continue to talk about and make sure that all of our listeners and all of our families, that they understand that this is something that we're trying to plan ahead and get ahead of the curve, if you will, to make sure that we're protecting you and your assets as you go through that in-between cognitive decline. The next thing I want to talk about is just in general for most people, because I think this is something if we're talking about learning and staying on that theme, it's what happens when I die if I don't have a will, if I don't have a trust, if I don't have estate documents set up. And so people come in and a lot of times they think, well, they may even say, hey, I got my will set up. Well, what we have teach people is that, hey, if you come in and the most important thing that you can do is first off, know what kind of assets that you have, because the rules may be different on each one of those. But let's say you have $500,000 to $1 million of assets in IRAs, Roth IRAs, brokerage accounts, etc. The most important thing that we would tell our families to do is make sure that they have a beneficiary designation on each of those accounts. That's one of the most important overlooked estate planning things or topics that you can focus on, is make sure that your beneficiaries are current and up to date. If you've been through a divorce, or if a spouse has passed, or if something may have happened, a life event, you may have never changed that. And those are big things that you can make sure that all of your assets will pass the way that you want them to go. And so knowing your beneficiaries, knowing how much you'd like to leave to your beneficiaries, if you want a net amount, is avoiding probate important to you? I know it is to us. These are types of questions that even if you don't have estate documents written up, if you feel like your situation is fairly simple, there's still things that you can do to make it even more efficient at the time of your passing.
Yeah, and I would tell you this: it's weird when it comes to estate planning, Daren. People will talk about it and then they'll go to bed and do nothing about it, right? Most of the time, estate plans are done when somebody has gone through a traumatic thing, loss of a parent, loss of a child, right? They've seen somebody else go through a crisis. And it's what we call triggers and transitions, right? And that triggers them to do something about it. What I would tell you is, at least do the least amount that you can do. We call it the Pringle Principle. Really is Lay's. Think about it. You can't just eat one chip. My coach is 74, 75 years old, and he confuses it with Pringles. The Pringle Principle is you don't do the most you can do. You figure out the least you can do, because once momentum starts, it will propel you through the rest, right? So worst case scenario, you've got a brokerage account. You can put a TOD, it stands for transfer on death, designation on there. It does not give your kids the money, but it makes sure that it transfers to them, very similar to a beneficiary designation. Keeps the process out of probate, in terms of that asset. Now, it will override what you have in your will or your trust, so you've got to make sure that they all go hand in hand. That's why we work with great legal firms, great attorneys, have one on staff. Give us a call at 800-928-4001. Get signed up for your Next Steps meeting at yourlifeafterwork.com. We'll give you 90 minutes of our best thought about your particular situation. yourlifeafterwork.com.